Hello and welcome to News in Depth here on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Allegations that Hungarian intelligence operatives spied on EU institutions have sent shockwaves through Brussels and come as Budapest continues to block Ukraine's EU accession talks. The revelations could deepen mistrust between Hungary and its European partners at a crucial moment for EU unity. Joining us is Alex Cadier, he's Senior Europe correspondent at TVP World, to discuss Hungary's espionage scandal, its political fallout, and how Prime Minister Viktor Orban's opposition complicates Ukraine's path to the European Union. Alex, welcome. You're joining us from the Brussels studio. Good to connect with you.
Well, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Okay, so espionage, I mean, it's not exactly the kind of thing one expects within the European Union, carried out by an EU country. Tell us more about it.
Well, that's the important detail, I think. By an EU country, it's not the most surprising story to hear that there are spies in Brussels. We've had reports of this from the Belgian counterintelligence services for many years, but those stories are usually about China, Russia, or countries that are deemed adversaries to the European Union. The notion that an EU member state had quite a sophisticated espionage ring in Brussels, certainly targeting EU institutions, is virtually unheard of. Now, in the past, if you look back to the early 2000s, you would have had allegations of potential espionage, nothing proven, but of member states between themselves, trying to suss out each other's positions, perhaps trying to get their hands on a better negotiating leverage, particularly between the UK, France, Germany, those inner EU rivals. This idea of Hungarian spy ring, as you said, really sending shockwaves here in Brussels. Let's dig into the detail a little bit more, what the allegations are. It's alleged that in the mid-2000s, so up to 2018, Hungarian foreign intelligence operatives posing as diplomats were in Brussels. They were trying to recruit mostly Hungarian officials within the European Commission, within other European institutions, exchanging money, trying to get sensitive information, trying to get documents, insights into the running of the European institutions, into how Brussels is functioning. This came, of course, at a time where Hungary was at loggerheads with Brussels. We can hardly remember a time when Hungary and Budapest were not at loggerheads with Brussels, but there was a big clash between Brussels and Budapest when it came to rule of law, to the way Hungary was being run by the Orban government. One of those pseudo-diplomats, and again, these are just allegations based on joint reporting from German, Belgian and Hungarian news outlets. One of those so-called pseudo-diplomats was also seconded to the European Commission, worked at the European Commission, had access to security files, possibly access to sensitive documents. So that is a really serious allegation either way. Now, of course, the Hungarian government for now has said that these allegations are baseless, but the European Commission had this to say in response.
The Commission is taking note, of course, of all the reporting on the subject matter today, according to which there have been espionage operations pursued by a Hungarian intelligence service against the EU and members of its staff. The Commission takes, as usual, such allegations very seriously, and we remain committed to protecting Commission staff, Commission information and networks from illicit intelligence gathering actions. Now, this is a matter of operational security, which is why, as usual, I won't be able to comment much, but what I can say is that we will be setting up an internal group to look into these allegations.
So what's interesting about that detail is that we can't comment much, we cannot talk about an ongoing investigation, but the European Commission, when it comes to press reporting, has sometimes in the past gone with a bit of a boilerplate, a standard template in their responses. They will sometimes just go, we don't comment on comments. The fact that the Commission is saying that they're going to set up a group to investigate these allegations means that at the very least they are taking them quite seriously. Again, these are just allegations. There's no hard evidence made public. We don't know exactly what was going on behind the scenes. But the fact that the Commission is at least taking these seriously enough to investigate them means that there might be something there.
Understood, Alex. The one thing that struck me in what you've just laid out for us is that these events occurred years ago, 5 to 7 years ago, 2018 to 2020. What's taken so long for them to come out?
Well, that's a really great question, in fact, and it's clear that the main trigger behind these investigations and this reaction from the European Commission would have been that press reporting. Certainly another sign of the importance of having media in Brussels scrutinizing those in power, scrutinizing the permanent representations, the embassies, the European institutions. And so there will be a lot of questions about the Commission and it not knowing, or at least not publicizing this information. We don't know if they knew beforehand. Another interesting detail from that press conference that I think will raise a lot of eyebrows and a lot of questions, and this goes back to the center of this story, these diplomats, these pseudo-diplomats, according to the allegations, were operating in the Hungarian permanent representation right here in Brussels. And, crucially, the ambassador at the time, Oliver Varhelyi. Now, a lot of us covering the Brussels bubble will know that Oliver Varhelyi was a European Commissioner under the last von der Leyen administration and is still a European Commissioner as we speak. He is the Commissioner for Health. That same spokesperson you just saw on screen in the last few moments was asked about this. You know, did the Commission know before that Mr. Varhelyi, who had been ambassador, was running an embassy where there were spies operating? The Commission said that when he was selected to be a European Commissioner, it did not have this information. So when you say what took them so long, well, that's a pretty good question. We don't have an answer, but certainly the Commission's feet will be held to the fire as to understand why they didn't know. Now, to be clear, there is no evidence at the moment. There are no clear links between Mr. Varhelyi and these alleged spies. So there will still be questions to be answered there. We do not have information that makes it clear that he was in any way involved. But it does pose a lot of questions as ambassador whether or not he knew that spies were operating in his embassy independently, completely from him. And if he did, and again, that's an if, and it's just speculation at this point, how on earth did the Commission, A, not know about the espionage, and B, allow someone who was involved or knew of it to become a European Commissioner? A lot of questions still to be posed to Mr. Varhelyi, a lot of questions for the European Commission about how they didn't catch this, and again, a lot of questions for the Hungarian government, because as I said, this scale of allegation, this level of EU member state espionage within the Brussels institutions is virtually unheard of, and certainly will rumble on and on in Brussels, and a lot of questions still to be answered on this espionage ring, a seriously dramatic story here in Brussels. Indeed, Alex. As you say, allegations only, but quite clearly these allegations are being taken very seriously. Now, how does this position Hungary in terms of its relationship with the rest of the European Union, especially considering, for example, Hungary's relationship with President Putin, Orban's reluctance to approve Ukraine's membership of the European Union? What's the feedback as a result of these allegations on top of everything else? Well, look, there's been growing frustration among the member states and among the European institutions at Hungary for years, and that's a possible link to this espionage ring, because actually the clashes between Budapest and Brussels have been long-standing, ongoing, and they were already happening back in those years around 2015, 2018, where this alleged espionage was happening. So clearly this is not a happy relationship. This is not a comfortable relationship between both sides. But certainly the relationship between Budapest and other member states, you think clearly with regards to the invasion of Ukraine and Hungary's ambiguous, ambivalent position, to put it kindly, when it comes to Ukraine, has been a source of immense frustration for Hungary's neighbours and for officials here in Brussels. And so there will be a lot of questions about the trust, what's left of it, if there's any left of it, and whether or not the European institutions, the Commission, will have to increase the pressure on Hungary when it comes to conditionality, which means the proof that it will need from Hungary to see that they're playing ball, to see that they're a good contributor, so to speak, to the European project. And if not, the European Commission may think about withholding more funds from Hungary. That has been an ongoing battle between Budapest and Brussels for years now. The other point, of course, is that there has been growing frustration with Hungary when it comes to its consumption of Russian oil. There is a European Union plan to wean this union and these 27 member states off Russian fossil fuels in 2027. The latest figures we have for August of this year is that the only two countries still buying Russian oil in the European Union, Slovakia, Hungary. A source of frustration, of course, for Ukraine as well, because they see that as Hungary helping to finance Russia's invasion of their country. So there's really a crucial point here about trust, right? The relationship between Brussels and Budapest, the ability to work at least in some level of good faith on things that both sides agree on. That trust was pretty worn down already. These espionage allegations certainly will not help any level of trust, particularly if these people were posing as diplomats, working in the permanent representation in Brussels, acting as if they were the representatives of Hungary.
Indeed, Alex. So trust is weaker than ever before. However, President Zelensky of Ukraine had some interesting words to say in terms of his country's EU accession plans. I think we've got that soundbite coming along.
Ukraine will be in the European Union, with or without Orban, because this is the choice of the people of Ukraine. I'm sure that Hungary, the Hungarian people, support Ukraine in any case. I'm sure of this.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, that's unsurprising. There's been real frustration in Ukraine against Viktor Orban, against the Hungarian position. As I said, they see the purchase of Russian fossil fuels as financing the invasion, and they have real frustrations with Hungary on blocking Ukraine's EU accession. From the perspective of Ukraine, they've been working hard on the reforms step by step, trying to open those chapters, those negotiating phases to be able to get themselves closer to the European Union. They've made reforms on anti-corruption. Some problems there, but we can come back to that. They're trying to make reforms on their judicial system, on the rule of law, on things to better align with the EU. And they see Hungary as a partner or maybe an ally, or at least not hostile to Moscow, blocking it for the sake of blocking it. Now, the official Hungarian government position is that they are concerned about Hungarian minorities in Ukraine, and they do not want a country at war to join the European Union. We heard that from Viktor Orban himself, talking about whether or not Ukraine should join the European Union, and this was the position from Viktor Orban.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that particular soundbite from Orban is coming up in just a second. But before we get to that, what I found quite interesting about what President Zelensky just said was, we are joining with or without Hungary's approval. Now, that sounds as though there's a way around, a workaround, to getting Hungary's approval to allow Ukraine access to the European Union. What do you think that might mean?
That's quite wishful at the moment, because the system in place is that Hungary has the ability to block this, because any accession process will be done with unanimity. That's how things stand at the moment, and that is the way the system has been built up to this point. But again, as I was talking about those growing frustrations with other member states, we've heard from Denmark in particular and others making it clear that they want to find a way around this. There is Antonio Costa, the European Council President's plan, the Costa plan, to find a way that these accession chapters or this process can move forward for Ukraine without a unanimous approval from the member states, using a qualified majority. And the assumption from Antonio Costa is that by using a majority vote, Hungary would not be able to have enough partners on board to block that accession process. But again, the frustration for the Ukrainians is that they see the European institutions not moving particularly quickly. And some member states have reservations about changing that process and making it easier for Ukraine to join in a way that others who joined back in 2004 had to go through this very system. Why would an exception be made for for Ukraine? So there's a bit of a balancing act in Brussels. There's not a clear position, but as I said, growing momentum. We've heard from Mette Frederiksen, the Danish Prime Minister, of course, Denmark, with the presidency of the European Council at the moment, wanting to find a way around this deadlock, because as they see it, Viktor Orban is just leveraging his position to try and gain more things out of Brussels, not because he actually wants to block Ukraine's membership.
Yeah, well, it's not only leaders like Mette Frederiksen who are having words with Orban. We have a soundbite between a conversation between Tusk, Prime Minister Tusk, and Viktor Orban coming up as well, which I'd like to get your view on when we've aired it.
Why we are afraid? We are stronger than they are. The question is whether we have...
I love you when you use my arguments.
Whether we have leadership to come together and to defend our interests together.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was a moment of levity at a European meeting, and certainly quite a nice interaction between the Polish Prime Minister and Viktor Orban, who are certainly in no way aligned when it comes to Ukraine's membership. Now, that particular point was about boosting Europe's defences against Russia, and Viktor Orban was saying, what are we worried about? We don't need to worry about this. Russia is not as strong as we are and much stronger than they are. And it was perhaps refreshing, as we can see from that interaction, for the Polish Prime Minister to hear Viktor Orban not adopting a naturally pro-Russian position. Now, that is the moment of levity that we saw at those leaders' meeting, but it does underscore a division between both leaders, a division in those positions, and making it clear that Hungary remains a complete outlier. Now, we've seen in the past at European Council meetings, at ministerial meetings, even down at the ambassador level, Hungary and Slovakia were blocking a lot of certainly sanctions against Russia or other issues. Slovakia seems to have been easing away from that position, further isolating Hungary as a thorn in the side of the other member states and the European institutions. The other point to say is that this allegations of espionage will even further push Hungary down on the kind of reject corner of the European Council, if I could be slightly informal about it, and that will remain a point of conflict between the two sides. So, we'll hear from Viktor Orban his view as to why he wants to block Ukraine and block sanctions on Russia and want to keep buying fossil fuels, but the list is just getting longer and longer. The real question is whether or not the European Union and other member states are willing to take concrete action.
Indeed. Now, in the last couple of minutes that we have left, Alex, there you are in Brussels. What's the sense you're getting in terms of the stability and the unity of the European Union in light of things like this, disagreements on Ukrainian accession and various other scandals, the espionage scandals and various others that have happened in the last couple of years? Are you seeing some fractures in the European Union's unified approach?
No fractures in the EU's kind of position on Ukraine. In fact, I would say it's probably solidified over the last few weeks and the last few months. We saw those drone incursions in Poland, the Russian jets over the skies in Estonia. All of these things will have actually solidified the EU's desire for unity. That was a point that President Zelensky made back in Ukraine, also saying that the division within the European leadership would be what Russia wants. And I think that has increasingly becoming priced in by those EU leaders. Of course, Ukraine's path to the European Union is still going to be very long. The kind of best case scenario would be about 5 years from now in 2030. But many experts that I've been speaking to think that remains rather unrealistic because of the scale of reform that Ukraine needs to make, and also the fact that the country remains at war and accession seems impossible in the conditions as they are right now. But when it comes to the European position, you really do now have Hungary as an outlier, still friendly with Moscow, still friendly when it comes to the Kremlin, and still blocking that Ukrainian accession. The path for Ukraine will be long. For now, Europe's still united. Their place will be in the EU.
Well, that's reassuring, certainly, Alex. Alex, a pleasure, as always, to talk to you. Thank you so much for bringing your analysis to our audience. Have a good day.
Pleasure was all mine.
And that brings us to the end of this episode of News in Depth. Goodbye.